What if the most overlooked recovery tool for your aging body isn't a supplement, a prescription, or a $200 sleep gadget, but a bottle of olive oil sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now? Most people use it to dress a salad and never think about it again. But a growing body of nutrition science has been looking at what extra virgin olive oil actually does inside your body overnight while you sleep, while your heart, your brain, your joints, and your gut are quietly doing their most important repair work of the entire day. And what researchers have found is more interesting than almost anyone expects. Here's what's at stake. Your body does its deepest healing while you sleep. Your brain clears out metabolic waste. Your blood vessels relax. Your immune system resets. Your muscles rebuild what the day wore down. But for a lot of adults in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, that overnight repair process isn't running the way it used to. Not because anything is broken, but because the body is missing some of the raw materials and signals it needs to do the job well. Inflammation creeps up. Blood sugar gets less stable overnight. Joints stiffen. Sleep gets lighter and more fragmented. Today we're going to walk through what the actual research says about extra virgin olive oil and the body's overnight repair systems, sleep, heart health, joints, gut, muscle, blood sugar, and brain health. Some of this evidence is strong, some of it is early and still developing. I'll be honest with you about which is which because you deserve real information, not hype. And by the end, you'll understand why some researchers have started calling this small, ordinary kitchen staple one of the most underrated tools we have for healthy aging. Before we get into it, if you're the kind of person who actually wants to understand your body instead of just being told what to do, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me what health topic keeps you up at night. Heart, joints, memory, energy, whatever it is. I read these and they shape what we cover next. Now let's get into it. Let's start with sleep itself, because this is where the story gets interesting fast, and where the real science already backs up something people have suspected for a long time. If you're over 60 and your sleep isn't what it used to be, it is rarely just stress or bad habits. A big piece of the puzzle is something researchers call low-grade chronic inflammation, and it tends to rise steadily as we age. That inflammation can interfere with the deep, restorative stages of sleep your body relies on to actually repair itself overnight. Picture a factory trying to run its night shift while smoke keeps filling the building. The workers are there, but they can't get the real repair work done. This is where olive oil gets genuinely interesting. Extra virgin olive oil contains a compound called oleocanthal, and it's not found in significant amounts in any other cooking oil. If you've ever taken a sip of a good, fresh, high-quality olive oil and felt a peppery sting at the back of your throat, that's oleocanthal announcing itself. Back in 2005, researchers at the Monell Chemical Senses Center, working with the University of Pennsylvania, discovered that this compound works through the same biological pathway as ibuprofen. It inhibits the same COX-1 and COX-2 enzymes that drive inflammation in the body. That finding was significant enough to be published in the journal Nature, and it's held up in the research since. To be clear about the scale here, one estimate suggests that around 50 grams of extra virgin olive oil, a little over 3 tablespoons, delivers an anti-inflammatory effect roughly comparable to a tenth of a standard adult ibuprofen dose. That's not a replacement for medication when you actually need it, but it does help explain why a diet built around real, high-quality olive oil, the kind at the center of the Mediterranean pattern of eating, keeps showing up in research tied to lower rates of chronic inflammatory conditions. So here's the practical piece. If you want to explore this for yourself, a tablespoon of good, cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil in the evening, ideally one with that noticeable peppery bite, is the version researchers are actually talking about when they discuss oleocanthal. Mild, bland olive oil often means the oleocanthal content is low. You can take it on its own, stirred into a little warm water, or as part of your evening meal. And that's just the beginning, because what this same compound does for your heart while you sleep is where things get even more important. Let's talk about your heart, because the timing of when your heart is most vulnerable might surprise you. It's not during exercise or a stressful afternoon. The most dangerous window for the heart is actually in the early morning hours, when blood pressure naturally surges and arterial stiffness tends to peak. This is a big part of why heart attacks are disproportionately common during sleep or right upon waking, especially as we get older and our arteries lose some of their natural elasticity. This is exactly the territory where the evidence for olive oil is strongest, and it isn't a small or shaky body of research. The PREDIMMED trial, one of the largest randomized nutrition trials ever run, followed more than 7,000 people in Spain who were at high cardiovascular risk. The the people whose diets were enriched with extra virgin olive oil saw about a 30% reduction in major cardiovascular events, things like heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death, compared to a standard low-fat diet. Follow-up analyses found that people in the highest range of olive oil consumption had roughly a 35 to 39% lower risk of cardiovascular disease compared to those who consumed the least, and every additional 10 grams of extra virgin olive oil a day was linked to meaningfully lower cardiovascular risk. This is one of the most well-replicated findings in modern nutrition science. Part of the explanation seems to come down to oleic acid, which makes up the majority of the fat in olive oil, and its effect on LDL cholesterol. Unoxidized LDL is fairly harmless as it circulates. It's oxidized LDL that tends to embed itself in artery walls and begin forming plaque. Olive oil's monounsaturated fat and polyphenol content appear to help protect LDL from that oxidation process. And because a large share of your liver's cholesterol regulation work happens overnight, having those healthy fats and polyphenols on board before bed rather than only at lunch may line up well with your body's own internal timing. If you're on heart medication already, this is exactly the kind of change worth mentioning to your doctor first. Not because olive oil is risky, but because any dietary shift that touches cholesterol and blood pressure is worth folding into the bigger picture of your care rather than adding on your own in isolation. It's worth pausing on why the Pradime trial carries so much weight in this conversation. It wasn't a small observational survey where people simply reported what they ate and researchers looked for patterns afterward. It was a genuine randomized controlled trial, one of the largest ever conducted on diet and cardiovascular disease, run across 11 university hospitals in Spain, with people actively assigned to different dietary patterns and followed for years. That kind of study design is what allows researchers to talk about cause and effect with real confidence, rather than just correlation. And when a large randomized trial and years of separate observational research from different countries keep landing on the same conclusion, that's about as solid as nutrition science gets. Other large studies, including a cohort of 30,000 Italian women followed for nearly 8 years, have independently found lower rates of coronary heart disease among those with the highest olive oil intake, and that kind of independent replication is exactly what turns an interesting finding into a genuinely trustworthy one. Now let's move to something that affects almost everyone eventually, your joints. If you wake up stiff, or if getting out of a chair after sitting for a while has become its own small project, you already know what joint inflammation feels like day to day. The tissue at the center of this is called synovial tissue, the thin lining inside your joints that produces the fluid, allowing bones to glide smoothly against each other. Think of it like the seal inside a mechanical joint. Over time, especially past 60, that seal can thin, fluid production slows, and low-grade inflammation starts wearing down the cartilage underneath. That combination is the biological backdrop of osteoarthritis, a condition that affects tens of millions of adults, most of them over 60. Oleocanthal's anti-inflammatory action is directly relevant here, because the same COX inhibition that helps with general inflammation also affects the prostaglandins involved in joint pain and cartilage breakdown. Research groups studying olive phenolics have found that oleocanthal can reduce the production of PGE2, a signaling molecule heavily implicated in the progression of osteoarthritis, and some laboratory research has looked at its effects on inflammatory markers found in the joint fluid of people with the condition. This is still an area of ongoing study rather than a settled, fully proven treatment, but it's a genuinely promising thread, and it fits the larger pattern seen across Mediterranean diet research, linking higher olive oil intake to lower rates of inflammatory joint conditions. If joint comfort is something you're working on, pairing your evening olive oil with a source of vitamin C, even something as simple as warm lemon water, makes physiological sense, since vitamin C is essential for the collagen synthesis that maintains both cartilage and the synovial membrane. None of this replaces a conversation with your doctor about arthritis management, but as a low-cost, low-risk addition, it holds up. Let's shift to your gut, because this is a piece of the puzzle that gets far less attention than it deserves, especially for people who assume gut health is mostly a younger person's concern. It isn't. If anything, it becomes more important with age. As we get older, the diversity of bacteria living in our gut tends to decline, a shift researchers call gut dysbiosis, and it's been linked to higher systemic inflammation, a less responsive immune system, and reduced nutrient absorption. Your gut isn't just handling digestion. It's one of the central regulators of inflammation throughout your entire body. Extra virgin olive oil turns out to be one of the more interesting foods in this conversation because a meaningful share of its polyphenols, including hydroxytyrosol, aren't fully absorbed in the small intestine. They travel down to the large intestine, where research suggests they can selectively support the growth of beneficial bacteria, including species like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, while working against some less favorable bacterial populations. This prebiotic-like effect is part of why olive oil keeps showing up as a standout component of the Mediterranean diet and gut microbiome research, even though this particular area of the science is still actively developing and researchers are still working out exactly how strong and how consistent these effects are across different people. There's also a nice overlap with sleep timing here. Your digestive system runs a cleanup process overnight called the migrating motor complex, a series of contractions that sweep through your intestines between meals, and it's most active during sleep. Having olive oil's polyphenols present in your system during that overnight window may amplify some of these gut-supporting effects, though this specific timing question hasn't been extensively studied on its own yet. Why does this matter so much for someone in their 60s or 70s specifically? Because the gut and the immune system are far more entangled than most people realize. A meaningful share of your immune tissue actually lives in and around your digestive tract, and the bacteria living there help train and regulate how your immune system responds to threats throughout your entire life. When gut diversity declines with age, the downstream effects aren't limited to digestion. Researchers have connected reduced gut diversity to a phenomenon sometimes called inflammaging, the slow, low-grade rise in systemic inflammation that seems to underlie a surprising number of age-related conditions, from joint pain to cardiovascular disease to cognitive decline. That's part of why the gut keeps showing up as a common thread, running underneath so many of the other benefits we've already discussed today. It isn't a separate system operating in isolation. It's connected to nearly everything else on this list. Now, right here, if any of this is landing for you, if you're starting to realize that some genuinely useful tools for your health have been sitting quietly in your kitchen the whole time, take a second and hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It genuinely helps this channel keep making videos like this one focused on real evidence-based information about healthy aging. Thank you. Now let's talk about something that becomes one of the biggest predictors of how long and how well you live: your muscles. Sarcopenia is the gradual, ongoing loss of muscle mass and strength that comes with age, and the numbers are sobering. Past 60, many adults lose somewhere around 1 to 2% of their muscle mass every year without any kind of intervention, and that adds up over decades into a real reduction in strength, independence, and metabolic health. Part of what drives this is a phenomenon researchers call anabolic resistance, meaning aging muscle becomes less responsive to the protein you eat. The same meal that would trigger a strong muscle-building response in a 30-year-old produces a much smaller response in someone in their 70s. This is an area where the research on olive oil specifically is newer and less extensive than the cardiovascular evidence, so I want to be upfront that this is more preliminary territory. Some early research has looked at whether olive oil's polyphenols can help support the signaling pathways involved in muscle protein synthesis, and whether they may help counter some of the mechanisms behind age-related muscle breakdown. It's a promising direction, and it fits with what we already know about olive oil's broader anti-inflammatory effects, since inflammation itself is one of the known contributors to muscle loss with age. But this piece of the picture deserves more research before we treat it as settled science. What is well established is that resistance exercise combined with adequate protein intake remains the single most powerful tool against sarcopenia, and healthy fats like olive oil support that effort as part of an overall pattern of eating rather than as a standalone fix. If you're working on maintaining strength as you age, a Mediterranean-style approach, olive oil, protein spread through the day, and regular resistance training is what the evidence actually supports. Now here's something that touches one of the most common and quietly frightening concerns for adults in their 60s and beyond. What happens to your blood sugar while you sleep? Blood sugar doesn't just sit flat and steady overnight. In people with insulin resistance, which affects a large share of adults over 65, whether or not it's ever been formally diagnosed, blood sugar can rise in the early morning hours through something called the dawn phenomenon, where the liver releases stored glucose in anticipation of waking up. In a well-functioning metabolic system, insulin manages that release smoothly. When insulin sensitivity has declined, that release can create a sharper spike, and repeated night after night, that pattern is linked over time to a higher risk of type 2 diabetes and, through the connection between blood sugar and brain health, cognitive decline as well. This is genuinely one of the better supported areas of olive oil research. Multiple studies have found that adding olive oil to a meal slows gastric emptying, meaning food moves out of the stomach more gradually, which blunts the blood sugar spike that follows. Olive oil's oleic acid also appears to support insulin sensitivity at the level of cell membrane receptors in muscle and liver tissue. Because insulin sensitivity naturally declines with age, often by a significant margin by the time people reach their 70s, this is one of the more meaningful practical benefits on this whole list, and it applies whether you already manage blood sugar concerns or you're simply trying to stay ahead of them. If this is relevant to you, having a modest amount of olive oil with your last meal or snack of the evening, rather than olive oil on its own, appears to be the more useful pattern, since its glucose blunting effect works specifically in the context of a meal. And now, the piece of this that I find the most genuinely fascinating, and the one I want you to hold on to the most carefully, because it's also the one where the science is still being worked out: your brain. Over the past 2 decades, researchers have identified something called the glymphatic system, essentially your brain's own overnight cleaning cycle. While you sleep, the space between brain cells actually expands slightly, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow through and flush out metabolic waste that builds up during the day, including a protein called beta amyloid, the same protein that forms the plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease. This clearance process is dramatically more active during sleep, particularly deep sleep, than during waking hours. Human studies using overnight monitoring have confirmed that sleep meaningfully increases the clearance of these waste proteins compared to sleep deprivation, and disrupted sleep has been consistently linked to a higher burden of these same proteins over time. Here's where I want to be careful with you, because this is the part where a lot of health content overstates what's actually known. Oleocanthol's broader anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties have led some researchers to investigate whether it might help support the biological pathways involved in clearing amyloid and tau proteins, largely in laboratory and animal model research so far. That's a genuinely exciting research direction, and it's consistent with everything else we've covered about oleocanthol's effects on inflammation. But it is not the same as saying olive oil has been proven in large human trials to meaningfully protect against Alzheimer's disease. The honest answer is that this connection is still being studied, and I'd rather tell you that clearly than oversell it to you. What we can say with real confidence is this: sleep quality itself is one of the most well-established modifiable factors in supporting your brain's own waste clearance system. And several of the other benefits we've already covered, better sleep continuity, reduced systemic inflammation, and improved blood sugar stability, are all factors independently linked to lower dementia risk in long-term studies. So even without overstating the direct brain clearance connection, olive oil's broader effects on sleep and inflammation plausibly support brain health through pathways we do understand well. Some researchers studying sleep and glymphatic function have also found that sleeping on your side, rather than on your back, appears to support more efficient waste clearance. So if you're optimizing this area of your health, sleep position is a genuinely evidence-backed piece of the puzzle worth considering alongside anything you eat. It's also worth understanding why this discovery mattered so much to neuroscience in the first place. For a long time, researchers assumed the brain simply didn't have a dedicated waste clearance system the way the rest of the body does through the lymphatic system. The identification of the glymphatic pathway and the finding that it operates almost exclusively during sleep helped explain something that had puzzled scientists for a long time: why sleep deprivation, even short-term, so reliably leaves people feeling mentally foggy, and why chronic poor sleep is one of the strongest known risk factors for later cognitive decline. It reframed sleep from something that simply lets the brain rest into something the brain actively needs in order to take out its own trash. That's a genuinely important shift in how we understand brain aging, independent of anything to do with diet, and it's part of why sleep quality deserves to be treated as seriously as diet and exercise when you're thinking about protecting your memory and cognitive function over the coming decades. So here's where all of this leaves us. None of what we've talked about today is a miracle cure, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I told you it was. But when you step back and look at the full picture, strong evidence for cardiovascular protection, solid evidence for blood sugar support, real biochemical grounding for its anti-inflammatory effects on sleep and joints, promising early research on gut health and muscle preservation, and a genuinely exciting, still developing research direction on brain health. Extra virgin olive oil holds up as one of the more well-supported, low-cost additions available for supporting your body's natural overnight repair processes as you age. A tablespoon of good quality extra virgin olive oil in the evening, the kind with a real peppery bite, costs less than $1 a day. It doesn't require a prescription or a gym membership or an overhaul of your entire life. It's one small, well-supported piece of a much larger picture that includes real sleep, regular movement, strong social connection, and good medical care. None of this replaces your doctor, your medications, or the other pillars of a healthy life. It's simply one more tool, grounded in real research, that's worth understanding. If this helped you see something ordinary in your kitchen a little differently, share it with someone who'd find it useful too. A parent, a partner, a friend who's been asking the same questions about their own health. And if you want more videos like this, ones that take the actual research seriously instead of exaggerating it, subscribe and stay curious. Your health is worth getting the real story, not just the exciting one. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.